Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this special hybrid meeting of Angus Council. I would remind all attendees that this meeting has been recorded and webcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. I've agreed the attendance of some members remotely and would remind all remote attendees to mute their microphones when not speaking. For any members of the public watching us, please note that all the public committee reports, including details of specific recommendations, are available on the Council's website. And we'll go straight on to the apologies, and Mrs Forsyth will intimate.
No apologies, Provost.
Straight on to item 2, declarations of interest or statements of transparency. Right, I don't see any hands, so we go straight on to 3, which is the Revenue and Capital Budget Outturn 24 to 25. And I would remind people that these reports are actually for noting, but they will form part of the motion and the amendments, which we will come to. Okay, and we go straight on then to item 4, which is the Council Delivery Plan 25-26. And I would just like to ask our Chief Executive, Mrs Lindsay, to introduce the report. Mrs Lindsay.
Thank you, Provost. The report before members here today introduces the draft delivery plan for 2025-26, aligning a number of key areas of operational focus and delivery to support the achievement of priorities approved by members in the existing 5-year Council plan, and these are supplemented by a range of linked service delivery plans that are included in the document. As the report sets out, Angus Council's sustainability and success is underpinned by your collective citizen-focused leadership in setting the Council's strategic direction and prioritising the use of Council resources. That leadership supports the continuing ability of officers to deliver across a wide range of local authority statutory duties and our wider agreed priorities for Angus, its people and its businesses. The plan as it's presented here will be updated and finalised after today's special council meeting to reflect the decisions taken today by members. And once it's finalised, the published plan will serve as a single point of reference, setting out the council's overarching strategic planning context, financial plan, change plan, workforce plans, highlighting the delivery commitments for 2025-26 and taking account of the approved financial envelope. This approach of aligning the overarching delivery plan and associated plans will support the implementation of our recently approved performance management framework. I'm really grateful for the work of Gordon Cargill and his team in supporting the coordination across all our directorates of this work, and he and other senior officers are available to take questions relating to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Lindsay. And at this point, I would invite any questions in relation to the delivery plan. And colleagues, I would just say that the recommendations in this report also form part of the motions and amendments, which we will come on to. But if anybody has any questions, please just let me know. It would appear we don't have any questions. Thank you. On to item 5, which is the Provisional Revenue and Capital Budgets 25, 26 and beyond. The verbal update on the outcome of the meeting of the Central Consultative Committee held on 27 February. And I would invite Mrs Sharon Faulkner. Mrs Faulkner, she can give a brief summary of the views expressed at that said meeting. Mrs Faulkner.
Thank you, Provost. The Central Consultative Committee met earlier today and considered the Council Plan, the Finance and Change Plan and Workforce Plan, along with reports related to the Provisional Revenue and Capital Budgets for 25, 26 and beyond. Unison and teaching staff representatives were in attendance. The Chief Executive and Director of Finance introduced the various reports and no questions were asked. Unison presented a detailed statement to the committee which reflected key messages and areas of concern that had been previously brought forward to members' attention over many years of budget cuts since 2013-14. Unison has power and position to influence change with regards to funding of local government at both UK and Scottish Government levels, stating that radical change is needed and that cutting budgets will not achieve this. Unison highlighted that continuous organisational change places huge pressure on the workforce and is detrimental to employee well-being. Concerns were raised about the increase in employee sickness absence over the past few years. Unison stated that the Council's workforce is passionate about the services it provides and employees need to be properly rewarded. They feel that a 3% pay rise will not achieve this and stated that pay had consistently failed to keep up with inflation. Differences in pay awards between different public sector organisations were highlighted, for example, between NHS and local government. Unison emphasised that it was not up to Angus Council employees to shoulder the burden of budget cuts. Specific budget options were highlighted as of concern, and it was presented that these would be detrimental to communities and citizens. These included the £250,000 cut in the management fee to Angus Alive and the potential impact on the provision of services, and the £1.3 million cut over 2 years in a review of 2 to 18 staffing structures. Unison highlighted ongoing pressures on dedicated and hard-working school-based staff. Unison encouraged elected members to think carefully about their budget decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Falconer. And at this point, I'm going to invite any questions on the reports B through to R for officers. This is going well. It would appear we don't have any questions. And I'll just move on, colleagues. We now move on to the motions and amendments, and I will now ask Councillor Duff, as Finance spokesperson, to move the budget proposals, and I would ask, do you have a seconder?
I do have, and Councillor Beattie will be the seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. On you go.
Okay, thank you, Provost. Once again, I should like to start by thanking those that participated in preparing this budget and acknowledge the assistance I've been given. Support from officers within the Finance Directorate has ever been very good, with the usual standards of impartiality, professionalism and good advice. I should like to thank my fellow members of the PBSG, Councillor Meechan, Cheap, Beattie, MacDonald, Wan, Gall and Dorn. Once the parties split at the end of January, the administration members only were involved in setting the budget. Special thanks go to the whole finance team, Gillian Woodcock, Jill Rennie, Kevin Lumsden, Darren O'Shea, who provided very good support throughout the process. And also I would mention Stephen Milne, who retired at the end of the year. Our Finance Director, Mr Ian Lorimer, has of course been pivotal to the whole exercise. I'd like to thank him for his hard work, guidance and advice. The whole CLT team have of course participated, and I'd like to thank all directors and their senior staff who've assisted. And I should like to thank all members of the administration group for helping to produce for what is very much a collegiate budget. As members are aware, we are a minority administration, and therefore we have reached out to other members to discuss budget proposals. We've had good conversations and have included certain items that some non-aligned members argued strongly for. I've been involved in 13 budgets, either in administration or opposition, and I can say that this has probably been the most challenging for a variety of reasons. Just moving on to maybe external situation, I would say over the last year, certain things have stabilised. Energy prices and general inflation are lower. Interest rates have eased a little. However, as the past 2 weeks have shown, there remains major worldwide uncertainties which may come back and impact council finances in the future. We've got two local issues, I suppose. We have the issue of teacher numbers, which will be addressed later. Employers' national insurance contributions was one such left field shock that few expected. The impact for the council's direct employees, Angus Alive and Tayside contracts, is about £5 million. Employees in the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership lead to an additional cost of £660,000. The compensation received from government still leaves a deficit of £2.484 million, and this difference needs to be borne by the Council, and this equates to a 3.9% increase in council tax. We have no option but to pass this on to the tax-paying public. Another risk is the potential issues for our supply chain, and particularly the health and social care supply chain. There is potential of cost increases once contracts are renewed. This change in ENICs, as it's been known, hits hardest on contributions paid for low-paid workers, and we know it has hit charities and third sector organisations seriously. A wee bit about the procedural change, as is detailed in the papers. The common starting point for all budgets, administration and other budgets is the output from the January 22nd cross-party PBSG meeting. So that, if you like, is the baseline. A little bit about the general revenue position. The council grant settlement of £281.498 million, which compared with last year was an increase of £5.129 million, an increase of 1.9%. This is the figure when ring-fence monies are excluded, and we look at this year and last year on a like-for-like basis. After a period of flat cash settlements, an increase in grant funding is to be welcomed and was better than expected. The estimated budget gap for the administration budget, after including the products of the change programme, was just under 11 million, 10.987 million. This gap comprises about 958,000 of one-off items and 10.029 of ongoing issues. And this gap must be met using council tax and reserves. I'll say a little bit about revenue cost reduction and increased charges. We now have received additional income from second homes at a 100% surcharge level and long-term empty properties, and these items amount to about £500,000. The proposed transient visitor levy is some years away, but that is another source of finance that we are interested in. Realistically, this may be one for the 2027 budget, and we anticipate a further report from officers later this year. On charging, we are proposing increasing general charges by 5%. We believe this increase is a fair, balancing increased staff costs with affordability, and recognising that some services we supply are in a competitive situation. Increases in charges from the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership and Angus Alive are included in the papers for members' approval. I'll now review the most significant budget changes by directorate. Many of these changes were set in train from the change programme and commenced in earlier years. I'll start with education. The change programme impact this year is limited to removal of specialist visiting teachers in primary schools, saving £152,000. Angus is one of the last remaining councils to take this saving. Teacher numbers and potential increase in teacher contact time have been major items of comment recently. Teacher numbers and potential have been an issue. I refer members to the comprehensive summary of Angus Council's position detailed on page 183 of your papers, Appendix 2, and I urge elected members to read the detail carefully. The issue is complex and an area of risk for Angus Council. If we cannot reach a satisfactory agreement with the Scottish Government, this could lead to a £1.5 million hit to Angus Council. In addition, it places major elements of the Council's change programme for 26-27 and 27-28 under threat, with a knock-on consequence on budget challenges for both years. The administration has accepted a budget pressure on ground maintenance of £42,000, initially recommended to PBSG for rejection, as that would have meant that it would be funded by raiding other areas of the education budget. Move on to infrastructure and environments and start with roads. And I'll start with town centre town centre car parking charges. These were introduced in 2018 by the previous Conservative-led administration. This administration has now taken the decision to remove parking charges in town centres permanently. As members are aware, they were merely paused during the COVID pandemic. This means that machines will be removed and signage changed. There is a one-off charge for this, and as members are aware, the Council's base budget has a figure of £285,000 income, which was previously covered by reserves. This change will add approximately 0.4% to council tax. I believe the administration is being open and honest with this statement. It is much better to deal with this matter on a permanent basis, as it is 5 years since the charges were suspended. The administration is looking at alternative vehicle charging options for motorhomes, and officers are working on options in this area. A further saving of £37,500 will be taken on roadworks and the review of charges. I'll move on to environmental services. Recycling centres have seen some changes over the past few years. The administration rejected proposals to close 2 recycling centres last year. This year, we are listening to public concerns and are restoring the general skip service to Brechin Recycling Centre. This change will cost £36,000 per annum and bring the services provided by all 5 recycling centres into line. Members will be aware of changes already approved on curbside collection regime. This will save £200,000 in the next financial year, and there is an associated saving in waste disposal costs of £65,000. The provision of blue bins is now moving on to phase 3 at present. Move on to vibrant communities and sustainable growth. The administration is rejecting the change programme item new targeted approach, which is in the plan for 25-26 for £450,000. This project was always seen as a high-risk target, and we are happy to remove it and continue to support our vibrant communities' welfare rights and employability teams. A small increase in the grant given to community councils is proposed. This is the most local area of citizen involvement, and its unpaid volunteers deserve a modest increase in funding. Economic development. Economic development is heavily involved in Tay-City deal work, and more recently has been involved in the emerging issues with JD Wilkie's move from Kirriemuir to Dundee. Support for offshore wind and the Montrose port are key objectives. During the year, we reversed a cut of £150,000 to service, and no further changes are proposed this year. The administration is committed to support local businesses and tourism. The recent agreement with the Carnoustie Golf and associated investors have plans that will develop and enhance Angus's golf tourism profile. The administration is rejoining Dundee and Angus Chamber of Commerce, reversing the decision taken by the previous administration. This emphasises our strong support for local businesses and tourism. I'll move on to holiday food and fun. This initiative started several years ago and provides holiday activities and a meal to children during school holidays. The reports we've had back on this scheme, I think, are always been encouraging. This year, we are again allocating £100,000 to this initiative, funded from unassigned reserves. And we note the intention to merge this initiative with Planet Youth. Move on to finance. A review of services provided by the Council to ensure a fair return on Council costs will be initiated, with a target saving of £315,000. Members will be consulted on details when these come forward. Coming on to the Health and Social Care Partnership. Funding of the partnership will be £78.640 million this year. This is an increase of £3.284 million from last year. In addition, funding for the partnership's ENIX costs of £357,000 will be provided. I'll move on to Angus Alive. and that was covered this morning in the discussions with the trade unions, and interestingly. I will remind members that the current administration inherited a change programme that had a proposal to successively reduce the management fee by 8 times £500,000. That's over 8 years. And the annual management fee is £4 million. A £500,000 saving was taken last year as the administration were constrained by the council tax freeze we had last year. This year we are taking a £250,000 saving, and I hope that we can gradually reduce our contribution to £2 million per annum, which we believe will underpin key services. The Angus Alive report contained in these papers from page 153 clearly outlines the challenges for the Trust and outlines the financial benefits it's delivered to Angus Council and the taxpayer since its inception in 2015. The administration's proposal is to balance the gap between the historic change programme and our new figure of £2 million by increasing the council tax to support these key and treasured services. This year, the reduction in the change programme saving from 500,000 to 250,000 is equivalent to a 0.4% increase in council tax. I'll move on to balancing the budget and council tax. The base position from the PBSG meeting in January is that the budget needs to meet a sum of 72.361 million, and existing council tax set last year yielded 63.484 million. I refer members to report 5J on page 168 and tables 1A, 2 and 4. The administration budget is shown on page 319. We're adding a total of £515,000 of ongoing budget issues, has £155,000 of one-off issues, and removes £450,000 from the change programme savings plan for 25-26. In addition, the administration is using an additional loan charge of £1 million to allow increased borrowing to support additions to the capital plan, and I will say more about that later. Our budget will be balanced by increasing the council tax by 11% and using 958,000 of one-off reserves and 2.802 million of ongoing reserves. And the ongoing reserve figure is within the target we set last year. I intend to give the Angus public an insight into our 3-year plan regarding stewardship of the council's affairs and council tax levels. Last year, where we had a council tax freeze, I did predict a double-digit increase. We are settling on 11%. Looking forward realistically, we must anticipate similar levels of increases for the next 2 years. And I think the papers we will produce today are suggesting circa 9% for years 2 and years 3. That said, any prediction a year ahead is fraught with danger given that there are so many uncertainties, but that's our best estimate. I think it's worth looking at the 3 years of our administration. We saw a 6% increase in 23, 0% last year and 11% this year. Over the 3 years, an average annual increase of 5.6% per annum on a compound basis. Including the proposed savings for 25-26, the Council will have saved over £100 million over the last 13 years. And the administration's view is that we cannot bear any further erosion of either staff or services. The change programme is continuing, but we need to be realistic that while efficiency savings are always possible and welcome, the years of saving large sums has come to an end. Our view is that the public will pay to maintain the current level of services. I'll move on to the use of reserves. It's worth remembering members that in 2023 we were in benefit of service concessions, which afforded an additional £22.9 million in reserves. These were added to variously assigned reserve funds, and this explains our healthy reserve position. Again, it's appropriate to review our available reserves, which amount to 18.295 million. The Spend to Save reserve, which will be used to fund projects that increase income and to pay for necessary reconstruction of the Council's activities to achieve a balanced budget over the next few years. This will be reduced from 1.5 to 1 million. The Severance Staff Training Redeployment Reserve will be reduced from 3.5 to 1.5 million, and the Exceptional Cross-Pressure Reserve will be increased to 2.75 million. The General Fund contingency will be increased by £500,000 to 5.5 million. A provision will be made for one-off budget issues from 26-27 to 28-29 of 1.5 million. A provision of 1.5 million will be made to a graduate modern apprenticeship programme. This is a new initiative that will improve our ability to grow our own talent. And a one-off top-up to roads, property and parks R&R funds will be made of £1 million. The final pot will be the reserve drawdown strategy to allow the Council to balance the budget over the forthcoming 4 years. This is set at 7.35 million, and the first portion of 2.8 million will be used this year. I'll move on to the capital plan, and I'll now turn to one of the most significant aspects of our budget. The capital plan, which is covered from page 238, and the full list of priority projects is on page 304 of your papers. Members will see that the plan is fully extended, as it is most years. That is, we have plans to use all the available resources we can afford, this from asset sales, government grant and council borrowing. As members will be aware, Angus has suffered seriously from the impacts of climate change over the past few years, and we need to recognise this and plan to act accordingly. It's administration's view that our capital programme needs additional resources to allow us to address the significant projects that are in front of us. I can mention the huge damage suffered in Brechin from Storm Babette, the long-standing coastal erosion issues, the flooding seen across the county and the damage done to roads and bridges. In addition, we may require investment in council buildings. Our school estate, while benefiting from many fine new buildings, does contain many old and energy inefficient buildings. I believe that the Council will have to work with Angus Alive to discuss capital investment in some of the council assets that are used by Angus Alive. We also have the challenges of our roads network and town centre car parks, which require a significant investment cost to keep them serviceable for residents and visitors. To enhance our capital plan, we are allocating £1 million to allow an increased borrowing capacity of £20 million. It's our intention to enhance this borrowing capacity annually to build a substantial fund to address the issues outlined above. So members are clear about the implications of this policy. The sums that pay for this borrowing are ring-fenced over the long term and thus not available for revenue purposes. And we're going to call this fund the Angus Public Infrastructure Fund, APIF. To be clear, this is a long-term plan to deal with our infrastructure where we have underinvested over years. The initial investment in the fund is equivalent to 1.5% on council tax. I'll say something very briefly about the rest of the capital plan, and bearing in mind this capital plan was the plan that was developed at the PBSG meeting on the 22nd of January and didn't allow for the measure I've outlined above. The plan is 121 million over the 5-year period, and we're allowing a 12.5% overage to cope with slippage. The plan is dominated by the Montrose and the Montefieth learning campuses at 66.5 million, and that project I think is on budget and on time. And to recognise the damage to our roads, a sum of 7.85 million was added to the capital plan, and that's the capital plan fully used at the moment. I would draw your attention to the important investment in the Arbroath Harbour, which is included in that plan, and that's welcome. And the capital contingency is 5.292 million. I had included an explanation of Storm Burdett and funding discussions, including the impact of the Bellwyn scheme. That's quite a lengthy piece, and I don't think it's relevant for the budget. If members are interested in it, that can be obtained from the Finance Director, and that saves me at least 2 pages. But I think that's probably helpful. One other thing I'll just mention is reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete rack. I know some members are concerned about the rack issue in certain houses, both council-owned and privately owned. While this is not addressed in the budget, a report is anticipated to come before the next Housing Committee in April. So I'll come to the conclusions. The administration has attempted to balance many factors. As last year, we've attempted to achieve 3 things: protect the most vulnerable, focus our resources on the most critical areas to support a long-term plan, and increase what charges we can to ensure the long-term viability of the Council. I'm now adding a 4th initiative: make strategic investments in our infrastructure funded by our new Angus Public Infrastructure Fund. On setting the council tax, any decision is a balance between many competing issues. These are the pressures on council finances, the continual pressure on council staff from continual cuts, looking ahead at the position over the next years and the diminishing returns anticipated from the change programme. After many years of austerity, we have included a few small measures to brighten up our environment and streetscape. And finally, the impact on the council taxpayer, and we acknowledge the pressures on citizens with more energy increases in the pipeline. The administration has considered all these factors carefully, and we've had useful input on affordability from Welfare Rights, our surveys of public views, and our relative position on council tax, and how we compare with other similar local authorities. I think there's no doubt that this year is challenging and the next 2 years will be extremely challenging. I commend this budget to the Council and ask the Deputy Finance Spokesperson, Councillor Beattie, to second.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Provost. Firstly, I'd like to echo my colleague, Councillor Duff, in offering thanks to all the officers who have assisted us in the preparation of the coming year's budget proposal. In particular, I'd like to thank Mr Lorimer and his team for their efforts and patience in what is a technically complex and very time-consuming task. Councillor Duff has already set the scene of the pressures that we face and has covered in detail how we plan to deal with them, so I won't repeat them now. Unlike Councillor Duff, this is only my 3rd budget, and each one has meant wrestling with difficult decisions. From a revenue standpoint, it's clear that we have now come to a stage where the change programme that has been followed for many years has run out of steam. There are no low-hanging fruits to be harvested. Those were gone long before I became a councillor, and same with many other elected members in the room today. Every suggested cut now impacts the services that the people of Angus hold dear. However, we're changing how we look at that and how it will have to be funded. I'll only touch on a few points, as I'm sure my colleagues will have their own points to make during the discussion. First, I'd like to address the plan to introduce the Angus Public Infrastructure Fund. This is an investment in the future of Angus. We are all aware of the need to be able to meet the challenges that climate change and ageing structure will bring. The repair and regeneration of areas across Angus that suffered most during the worst of the storms, none more so than Brecon, dealing with coastal erosion and maintaining our ageing school estate. The money for this needs to come from somewhere, and the introduction of our infrastructure fund will provide a boost to our capital plan and will put us in a better position to meet unexpected future challenges. Since the last budget, we have listened to the people of Angus, and not only to the responses in our consultations, but also to the individuals and community groups that we've spoken to over the last year. We've listened to local businesses fearful of a return of parking charges and have acted to remove them completely, not kick the can down the road. In the same way, we have listened to our communities and supported our communities team in delivering services again by removing, not deferring, the proposed saving from the change plan. We've listened to our officers about how beneficial the Holiday Food and Fun initiative was to families across Angus, and we've once again allocated funding in that area, alone this time I know. We also recognise that our community councillors are not immune to increasing costs of venue hire and training costs, so we've increased their grant to help them out. In line with our council plan, we will reintroduce general waste collection at Brecon Recycling Centre. I remember having to defend claims that we were planning to close that centre, but instead we have not only retained the centre, we've increased provision to the people of Brecon and Edsall. We have to provide a balanced budget. The coming years will provide the same challenges that we've met so far. We cannot live off the reserves indefinitely, and we're forced to make difficult decisions. However, in this budget, I believe we have balanced prudence, foresight and affordability, and I would like to second the administration's budget proposal. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, and I'd like to call, and thank you both, I'd like to call on Councillor Ian Gall. Are you proposing an amendment? That's what I've got written here, Ian. Is that okay? And I'd like to ask you at this point, do you have a seconder? Yes, I do. And you've got Councillor Wine. Thank you. Ian? Would you like to present your amendment, please? Is that what you're doing at this point? Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. First, I'd like to thank Ian Warner and his team for continuing to deliver the near impossible, and also thanks to Kevin and Tina for helping pull our opposition budget together. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Councillor Duff for hosting the PBSG meetings with Mr Warner. Each PBSG meeting becomes increasingly sobering given the context of our financial position, but they are vitally important in setting the scene for where Angus is during our financial year and how we see a route to a balanced budget come budget setting each February. Budget setting should be the day where the Council administration enters the chamber with beaming smiles, excited to discuss and explain their vision and plan for how they see Angus Council in the next financial year, but also the long term. Sadly, the backdrop to today's budget setting focuses on more than a decade of continual cuts that has seen more than £100 million trimmed from Angus Council's budget. An easy task in the initial years, as there was lots of low-hanging fruit to easily remove. But as the years have rolled on, the cuts have become deeper and deeper, to a point where millions of pounds of reserves are required simply to balance the budget. And yet we still have a funding gap over the next 3 years running into the tens of millions, which still hangs over our head. This position is completely unsustainable. It has been for years, and we are watching on as we sign off another year of managed decline, just hoping to keep the lights on in the short term, as the long-term outlook is so bleak it cannot be considered. We cannot allow today to pass without highlighting one of the key issues hampering councils. Year after year of council tax freezes and interference from Scottish Government on council tax setting has lost Angus Council millions of pounds of spending power each year. Councils have very few financial levers at their disposal, so stuck in the impossible position of being expected to meet more and more statutory requirements with little ability to raise income out with the block grant received from the Scottish Government. This all sets the scene for today. Every single elected member could have presented a budget today and it would have been largely identical, out with a few tweaks here and there, because we find ourselves in such a tight position where there's little to no wiggle room to have any real vision or positive impact. We have absolutely no ability to set out a long-term vision or plan because we cannot even fund our current position without dipping into reserves to the tune of millions. At this point, the relationship between councils and government could not be more strained. As I've mentioned, our opposition budget is largely the same with a couple of tweaks, which I'll touch on below. Firstly, though, I will announce that our opposition group is proposing a 9.5% increase in council tax for the 25-26 budget setting, and we would balance, we would use 2.002 million of reserves to fund one-off and change programme deferrals and 1.893 million to balance the rest of the budget. We're all aware of the squeezed pockets of residents right now as we look towards council tax rises, high utility costs and inflation beginning to rise again after a little bit of stability, wage growth struggling to keep up, and it sets very, very tight budgets. In this, we would freeze school meals under the Education and Lifelong Learning umbrella to provide a tiny bit of help where it's needed. Under infrastructure and environment, we continue to reject reintroducing car parking charges. Nobody blinks when they go to a city about paying to park. Most of the time, it's luck just to find a spot, never mind the fee to park. However, as our towns and high streets continue to face society changes, they do not enjoy the huge footfall our Scottish cities do. And although providing free parking is a cost to the council, given that the estimates to bring our car parks up to a standard is priced at 2.5 million, we believe, given the current economic climate, it is the right thing to do, so we can encourage as many people as possible into our Angus towns as easily as possible. Winter of 23 was unprecedentedly wet. A huge pressure was put on our road network, especially our rural roads. As we see more and more electric cars come into circulation, we are seeing heavier weights and more wear in our road networks. We would allocate an additional £507,000 to road repairs and works where projects allow. Again, a drop in the ocean to what is required, but the funding just isn't there. Within the Vibrant Communities and Sustainable Growth Department, we would delay the target approach set and valued at £450,000. Councillor Duff has already mentioned how high risk this was, and that's something we agree on. As mentioned before, departments across the council portfolio have been subjected to annual cuts and restructuring year after year with no breathing space. We believe this added pressure could see certain provisions missed, and a year's delay at least would allow more time to secure relationships building within the third sector. We appreciate this is a one-off deferral, and we would have to look at this again in 26-27 budget setting, but some breathing space to secure external links and relationships could prove vital. We would also like to see £50,000 given to extra support to the Economic Department. We have to understand how Angus residents see our towns and villages and how we can help reshape these spaces as we adjust to society changes, which has seen a huge shift in consumer and society behaviour. We live in a world where you can order something online at 3 p.m. and it's delivered to your home the next day. Of course, there are a lot of advantages to this, but it also takes more and more people out of our small independent shops who cannot compete with the global giants on price or selection. Our high streets are the beating heart of our towns, and although the traditional shopping behaviour of decades ago will never come back, we can look at how we can use spaces and encourage independent shops to open and flourish. You only have to look at the likes of St Andrews or Dunkeld to see how busy a high street can be. Obviously, there has to be significant expectation coming as there's context to why the likes of St Andrews and Dunkeld are so busy, but that doesn't stop us harnessing the many attributes on offer here in Angus, especially when you see the likes of the Eden project coming to our very doorstep, and we need to pull the many visitors that site will attract into Angus to enjoy some of that spend here, but more importantly, create the best Angus we can for our constituents. In conclusion, this is obviously incredibly difficult. We have this backdrop of huge cuts, and we thought that our budget tried to mitigate where we could, protect the most vulnerable where we could, but that also does include a significant increase in council tax, and we know this couldn't come at a worse time when we see water prices, etc., rise. But we believe in balance, given the position that we have to deliver a balanced budget, it's fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gall. Can I now bring in Councillor Wan?
Thank you, Provost. I'm not going to add very much to that. I think we're all a little bit disappointed with what we'll have to spend this year and the cuts that we're having to make again. But you know, we've tried our best looking through the budget with Councillor Gall, and I appreciate that the administration group have had an extremely hard time as well. So yes, well, we're not all smiling today about budget time like we maybe did 6, 7, 8 years ago. It's something that we'll have to do every year. Well, again, here we are today about the council tax freezes. We hear about that all the time. It's been 11, 12 years, whatever it is, we've faced this. Today we're hearing of a double figure rise from our SNP administration group. I do completely understand why this is needed, because we're broke. But our constituents are the ones facing this increase, and I don't believe that they will actually sit back and just accept the 11%. We heard from Councillor Beattie there saying that we've listened to our constituents. I think they were quoted in the paper today saying 6.04% increase is what they're wanting. But again, fully understand why the increases are needed to be higher than the 6.04. Car parking charges, they've been parked forever, or at least until the next time. I'm sure this will come around in some of our times again in the future. And I do remember Councillor Duff, our leader, saying back in 2018 that the parking charges were the least bad option in allowing the council to balance the books. We did listen to the people of Angus back then, and we did park them for the time, but we're actually saying let's not take the machines out of the car parks in case they are needed in the future, so there's not a huge capital expenditure to come round again. But anyway, back to the budget of today. Ian Gall said it sequentially. I think we need to be looking and listening. We have looked and listened, and again, I'm disappointed in where the budget's going today, but that's all from me. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Wan. At this point, colleagues, I would propose an adjournment of 30 minutes. Yes, we're going straight to that now. But as soon as we come back, I'll remember that people will be going to questions. That's something we've agreed. So I'll say it again so that you understand. At this point, I would propose an adjournment of 30 minutes to allow members to discuss both the proposals. Is that agreed? But as soon as we come back, there will be questions. Time for questions.
Can we stop the live stream, please?
Okay, colleagues, we're back after a wee refreshment there. I'll now go to questions, and after that we will go to comments. Now I'm going to show a slight indulgence to Councillor Melville because I stopped him in his tracks earlier, but you're going to be first for a comment. You're going to be first for a question because we went downstairs to your adjournment. So, Councillor Melville.
Don't have any questions, Provost.
Okay, doesn't have a question. Anybody else with a question? No, we don't have any questions. Oh, we do have a question. We've got Councillor Doran.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a question on the kind of 3-year projection for the administration budget that's proposed. So in 3 years' time, from my understanding, there's a 2.7 million kind of gap left within the funding, with projected council tax increases of 9% in future years. Now, I understand that we're only setting the targets for today and for the next year's budget, but we've all had to do a 3-year projection as well. So I just wanted to double check that position. Thanks.
So I would deem that to go where?
I'm happy to.
You're going to put that
to answer that. Yeah,
to yourself.
Yes. So in calculating the 3-year position, it very much depends on what happens in the first year, and then the knock-on impact onto that, particularly around council tax increases and reserves. But yes, the cumulative position at the end of the 3-year position is 2.773, I think it is, for the administration's budget.
Is that okay, Councillor Doran? Councillor Wan.
Thanks, Provost. I've got 2 very quick questions, if you oblige. First one's on Angus Alive. It's probably more a question for Angus Alive, but the deferring of the management fee reduction or increase, whatever you want to call it, and it's going to be till next year. Is that going to be even more of a struggle next year for Angus Alive, on the basis that we know things are getting harder and harder year in? And I'll ask that one first, if you don't mind.
Right.
Mr. Lorimer, are you answering that? Or is it Councillor Duff?
I'm not sure there is a deferral of the Angus Alive saving, but so there's a proposal in the papers to, I think it's the same across all 3 budgets, to have a saving of 250,000 in each of the next three financial years. It was, but that's all. It was initially 500,000, Councillor Wan. I'm seeing your point now. Yes, that has all been worked through in terms of the figures, though, and the 250,000 for next year. The expectation is that will have a limited impact on, if any impact on service provision, hopefully covered from additional income.
You're okay, Councillor Wan. Sorry, any other questions? Am I safe to move on to comments? Now I would invite Councillor Melville if he wants to make a comment.
Thank you, Provost, and apologies for the confusion earlier. Before this budget meeting, I wrote to Mr. Lorimer to ask about the impact of the UK Government's national insurance hike, and he revealed a £5 million wrecking ball taken to this council's finances, which we simply could not have planned for. That's money which should have been spent on frontline services now being clawed back by the UK Government. Now, that's had to be factored into everybody's proposals today, but it's clear that there are differences in approach from the 3 groups. Councillor Gall has spoken about the impact of cuts and the need for more investment. But I just wonder if he's read his own budget proposals. A long-term investment fund for critical infrastructure, that's in our budget, it's not in the Tory budget. Rejoining the Chamber of Commerce to improve ties with business, in our budget, not in the Tory budget. Staff working to tackle climate change, cut in the Tory budget. The Holiday Food and Fund programme, cut entirely in the Tory budget. They've kicked the can down the road on £450,000 of cuts to communities. We've removed it entirely. And the spectre of town centre car parking charges still lurks in the background of their financial plans. And no investment, no ambition proposal from the opposition. Meanwhile, our budget also protects the vital frontline services that our communities rely on. Swimming pools, public libraries and access offices, under threat elsewhere, have been protected here in Angus by this administration. We're building the Montefiore Learning Campus on time and on budget, due to open in just a few months' time. Now, I appeal to colleagues before we make our decisions today to think about what we actually want this council to do. Do we want to invest in critical infrastructure, deal with the effects of climate change, tackle poverty, improve housing, protect community services and promote growth? If we do, then colleagues must support the administration's budget today. There are difficult decisions here, there's no doubt about that, and we all have to make them. But colleagues, it is not enough to will the ends, we must also will the means. And I hope colleagues will listen to that and make the right decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Melville. Next, I have Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, this has been another trying year financially for this council. However, we're no different from any other local authority in Scotland. But we are where we are, and the books need to be balanced the best way possible to keep afloat, to continue to give the residents of Angus the statutory services they expect from us, and along with maintaining our schools, roads, parks, etc. Everyone in this chamber is fully aware of the mammoth effort this takes, and thank you to the public who took the time to visit the Council's website to crunch the numbers on the budget calculator and give their views on where the money should be spent and also saved. A couple of things to note was the view that we need to reduce the staffing numbers and to increase efforts to recover outstanding council tax arrears. While there may be a strong case for streamlining senior posts within the council, I would urge caution when it comes to our staff. Many of our workforce go above and beyond, and I've been online myself in the evenings and noticed staff still logged in, working away. Much of this is not seen by the public. The council tax arrears situation is horrendous, and efforts to address this must be ramped up. Situations should not be allowed to get to this level in the first place, because it gets to a point where it becomes virtually impossible to address. Moving on to today, I note that the administration group have it in their papers to remove the ill-fated parking meters from our car parks. There's no need to go over old ground on this one. The public were against it from day one. It wasn't well thought out at the time, but all the members at the time, including myself, agreed with the officers' recommendations to introduce parking charges, which seen them subsequently suspended in 2020, and they've been sitting dormant since then. As far as I'm aware, there are no ongoing costs associated with the meters, so I question the needs to remove them at a cost of £50,000 plus. If I'm correct in what I say, this money could be spent elsewhere, possibly put towards the cost of resurfacing our car parks, which Councillor Duff has already said many are requiring. Finally, after the previous administration led Angus Council to the top of the Scottish Premier League and confirmed us as #1 for recycling, we've seen a constant decline in these rates, with the latest figures available showing us now languishing in 7th position. With the administration's budget, including the provision of a general waste skip back into the Brecon Recycling Centre, I feel this is a step backwards in terms of recycling, and I'm not sure they're fully behind the need to recycle. Does Councillor Whiteside agree with the general waste provision returning to the Brecon Centre? Because only 2 days ago at the meeting of the Communities Committee, Councillor Whiteside stated we should be focusing on reducing general waste and not necessarily worrying too much about the recycling figure. It sounds like the admin group are not sure what they want to do with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart, and I'm going to bring in Councillor MacDonald.
It's interesting that Councillor Stewart's gone personal on this when he was the Vice Convener of Communities that brought in a lot of the matters we're having to address in the budgets today. If we're being practical out of the budgets, there's pretty much very little between the two of them other than choices around things like that Councillor Melville already highlighted. The difference between the council tax rates is all to do with the investment scheme that we're suggesting for a very small amount of money. I believe it's about 200, a very small amount of money. It brings in an extra 20 million potential of borrowing a year, which is really good. And Councillor Stewart has suggested that the parking meters be remaining in place. Well, these meters are now obsolete. They'll have to go. They can't be used again. So if we do at any point as a local authority, and it'll be well without my time here, I'll be long gone, reintroduce parking charges, those meters are just going to sit there covered in bin bags effectively, confusing people about whether or not they should pay to park in our Angus car parks. There was a lot between the two administrations, the previous administration of which I've already mentioned Councillor Stewart was part of. There was a lot of debate around the recycling centres and the provision, but general waste doesn't go away. The convenience of where you put it is a factor, and the people of Brechin have had to go to Forfar and Montrose to remove their general waste. We're now making it easier for the people of Brechin, and who knows, they might take more recycling down to the recycling centre because they've got a bigger trip to do. The other side of the coin is, and I'm not answering for Councillor Whiteside, but the specific comment she was referring to was around how you calculate the success of recycling schemes. We actually want recycling rates to go down because you want people to not have to recycle. You want to reuse. How many people in this room have got water bottles with them or glasses or things like that? If you've got a plastic water bottle in front of you, you're recycling that. But if you've got an actual reusable cup, you're not. So that was what the specifics of her point was about. And if we listened in the Communities Committee, Suzanne Austin gave us a very good explanation of what the changes are happening under a new recycling scheme. So I would not be surprised if going forward we look at our changes to recycling, and I thought the Communities Committee actually came forward quite constructively on that debate around our recycling rates, around the future of waste provision in Angus. So it's disappointing to hear those sort of almost attacks when the budgets are slight differences. We're putting general waste back into Brechin. We're saving holiday food and fun. The main difference is how we deal with our infrastructure projects going forward. The council tax rate's the same if we didn't have that as part of it. So when Councillor Gall mentioned the long-term plan, we are the ones that have got it there with that extra 1.5% of council tax that's delivering that investment fund. So for all the questions that have been asked by Councillor Stewart specifically on that point, the meters are a liability. They do cost us money, and they are an issue. So why not just get rid of them like we've done instead of kicking the can down the road?
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Any more? We've got Councillor Whiteside and Councillor Speed.
Thank you.
Councillor Proctor as well. So I've got Councillor Whiteside, Speed and Proctor.
Thanks, Provost, and thank you to Councillor MacDonald for clarifying that situation. I think my remarks were misinterpreted by Councillor Stewart, so I'll not go over that again. But I did want to say I'm definitely a fan of recycling where necessary and most definitely reuse if possible. But unfortunately, there are some things in our society that we can't recycle or reuse, and the people of Brechin deserve the same opportunities as other people in Angus in order to be able to dispose of it safely. The other point is the differences between the proposed council tax increases are relatively small, 1.5%, and as others have mentioned, that equates to the amount of money we're putting into the infrastructure fund for long-term planning. It's a very small amount in monthly payments for people. It actually amounts to less than £2 a month, the difference between a 9.5% increase and an 11% increase, £1.98, I believe. Which is a small amount for individual families, taken into account we do know that people are struggling. However, the cumulative effect for the council is huge in the amount of resource it can provide to enable us to deliver our services effectively, and that's what we're concentrating on this year. So I encourage people to support our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whiteside. Councillor Speed.
Thank you, Provost. I want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of our officers and to my elected member colleagues across the Chamber who have strived and put forth thoughtful and well-considered budget plans. I truly respect all your efforts to address the needs and aspirations of our residents. I fully understand the need to bring a balanced budget. However, the harsh reality is that the underfunding of local authorities, including Angus Council, has created insurmountable obstacles, and the current level of funding simply does not meet the pressing needs of our communities and our most vulnerable. Our economy is under repetitive strain, and poverty and inequality continues to cut deep. Communities are impacted, and the current financial constraints and further cuts only exacerbate these issues. With poor housing stock and low supply, our most vulnerable, including older people, are often being offered bed and breakfast accommodation. Health and social care is on its knees and in crisis, and unprecedented staff sickness absence within teams, with teams being asked to do more with less. The most vulnerable members of Angus often rely on essential services, which are being stretched thin, leaving them without the proper support that they need to lead fulfilling lives. The impact of this underfunding is far-reaching and detrimental. Our dedicated workforce also bears the brunt of this financial strain, often to the detriment of their own well-being. A recent Audit Scotland report highlighted the need for an effective and sustainable long-term plans that mitigate the negative impact on our communities. And yet, year on year, we are faced with more cuts, service reviews and sticking plasters to cover gaping wounds within Angus. Angus is struggling, and it's essential that we advocate for fair and sufficient financial support from higher levels of government. Only then can we fairly and truly address the needs of our communities and provide high-quality services that our constituents desperately need and deserve. I'm sure a budget will pass today, and I will continue to work hard for my constituents and work with you all, and I will continue to bring scrutiny as well as strive to ensure that our finite resources bring maximum benefit for the people of Angus. In conclusion, while I deeply appreciate the hard work and dedication of all those involved in bringing these budget proposals, I cannot in good conscience support them in their current form. Radical change is needed. I will abstain in protest and stand shoulder to shoulder with the workforce and our communities who continue to be impacted.
Thank you, Councillor Speed, and thank you for keeping that concise. Thank you so much. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Provost. I actually concur with a lot of what Councillor Speed just said there. However, I will vote. The point I just want to bring up, the administration is going to reinstate the Brighan waste site. Now, we in Creamure had a very successful recycling centre. The previous administration kept all the centres going. However, Creamure's recycling and our waste site was closed. I'm going to have to go back to my constituents I know I'll be asked the question, what Brighan's managing to get their centre reopened. What about Creamure? Now, it was mentioned that, you know, the distance from Brighan to Montrose, well, we've still got the same thing from Creamure to Forfar. And when you actually take it into the hinterland, if you go up into the glens behind Creamure, that distance isn't a mere 6 miles. It actually is about 16 miles. So we're actually suffering the same problems as what Brighan did. And I feel that's actually quite unfair. I feel I should make that comment. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. And I would like to bring in Councillor Cowdy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I guess mine's a slightly different type of comment. First of all, I wanted to say thank you very much as a non-aligned member to both the administration and the opposition for the civil and instructive and friendly way that they've both engaged with me on this. I think that is definitely the way forward. And I agree with so much of what Councillor Speed said around the way the system is, I think, broken. It's just about how we most constructively try and input into that, whether we work within the system to get these small wins or whether we choose to make a different kind of statement. And I think both of those approaches should be respected. So at this point, I'll wait to hear the final budget that's coming forward, but I actually wanted to make a positive comment on how civil everyone's been about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cowdy. Now, unless there's any, can I bring you in now, Councillor Cheap? Anybody else? I think I'll bring in Councillor Cheap and then Councillor Boyd.
Okay, thank you, Provost. As an independent member of this ruling administration, I throw my weight wholeheartedly behind the budget moved by the Leader of the Council today. Councillor Melville is absolutely correct in his comments regarding the impact of the punitive to all increase in employers' national insurance contributions. Public need to realise that that cost, out with our control, alone makes up for almost 4% of the overall 11% proposed increase in council tax. We have no reason to apologise for having the prudent foresight to add a further 1% to council tax to allow us to borrow up to £20 million to invest in Angus. Angus and its constituents are crying out for investment in our assets, whether that be improving our roads, pavements and other transport infrastructure, or saving our coastline and rivers and resultant localities from the impacts of climate change. How else are we going to find the funds for future protection? The balance of our proposed council tax increase will, amongst other things, allow us to meet the inflationary costs we continue to face from our third-party suppliers. It will allow us to continue to support what many others see as our vital local services, our green spaces, our libraries, museums and galleries, protecting these while other local councils have no alternative but to consider closure. No further cuts to local waste and recycling, but instead returning services back to communities, such as the general waste facilities, to Brechin. Equality of services across Angus's localities, as I've always asked for. It is the effective and prudent financial controls of this administration, supported by a diligent and hard-working council finance team led by Ian Lorimer, that allows us to continue to protect these heart-of-community assets. I should add that I'm particularly pleased that we're proposing an increase in the budgets of our hard-working volunteer community councils, funds that will allow them to safeguard premises for their meetings or allow them fundamental core expenditure simply to allow them to continue to function. A fund to be used to clean up Angus will also be welcomed by our constituents and encourage pride in our communities. I acknowledge that residents may have concerns as regards the extent of the proposed increase in council tax. As a council, although protecting staffing levels, we should recognise the considerable cost to this council of absence from work and reported unpaid council tax, and that more work is required to minimise such costs. We need to move away from Angus being amongst the local authorities with the lowest council tax and move perhaps towards the median. Even with our proposed 11% increase today, due to not dissimilar increases across other authorities, we will still remain among the lowest. But at least we will have the ability to continue with our plan to invest in Angus. So despite this administration being past the midpoint between elections, we continue to look to the remainder of our period of running Angus Council with vim and vigour, ambitious and forward-thinking, despite having to work with shrinking resources, and in doing so, ensure the very best we can do for all residents of Angus. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cheap. And now I'll go and bring in Councillor Boyd. Councillor Boyd.
Well, I'm just going to have to change things that I've just said there, or delete things there. So mine will be shorter. We have to have council taxes increases. We are an efficient council. We have, as David said, we do have one of the lowest council rates here. More importantly, I can tell you, I really think, because there's an election next year down in Holyrood, we will see council tax freezes this year. If we don't take as much as we can just now, we will find out that we're in a worse problem. That will therefore mean that our frontline services, like Angus Alive, where we're important for our libraries and our gyms and everything else that goes with it. So we need to do as much as we can, and I think I'll be able to explain that to my constituents, that these are the reasons why we should be doing this. I'm not scared of increasing taxes. Taxes give you valuable services. We shouldn't be scared to say that. I'd like to also thank Councillor Duff, who did keep in touch with us all, or with all of us. They are now in a minority administration. My big ask was actually to make sure that Brechin Recycling Centre was turned from a recycling centre back into taking, and that was one of my asks. Councillor Duff gave me that ask. Because that's what's fair for Angus. That's what's fair for Angus. The last administration had a two-tier system when it came to recycling centres and that. Yes, maybe 2 have closed now, but at the end of the day, South Angus didn't have anywhere to take their rubbish. So don't want to take credit for it on that one, but I just want people to be aware that's the reason. The biggest reason for voting for this administration budget is because, one, they listened to me, and one, they were looking at and being fair towards Brechin. They've gone through enough. They deserved it. Let's make sure we have a fair and equal Angus. Thank you.
Councillor Boyd. I see no more hands. Councillor Vaughan, you proved me wrong.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I think somebody mentioned that we're midway through this election, but maybe not forgetting that there's
Can
an
I
election.
just ask that please hush? There is somebody speaking. That
There's an election next year, and I'd just like to thank Councillor Melville for giving us his speech for next year's election that's coming up. And what we're actually forgetting here is the council tax, which Councillor Boyd preached about, not wanting to increase, or quite happy to increase, and we should increase it as much as we can. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that, but for the last, 13, 14 years, our hands have been tied. We haven't been able to increase. So it's not the fact that we are one of the lowest, or we're one of the lowest in Scotland and the mainland. It's the fact that we were never allowed to increase it. And why we were never allowed to increase it? Because we were always told, don't increase by our Scottish Government. So let's not pretend here today that we're increasing this 11% to help out. We're increasing it because of the years that we haven't been able to. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vaughan. I think we are definitely at the stage now. I can't see. Oh, sorry, I forgot about you. Councillor Braze.
Hi, thanks, Provost. I'm easy forgotten. I'm sorry I can't be there in person today due to unavoidable circumstance, but I've really enjoyed this meeting. I've enjoyed the speeches made, and what's really impressed me is the understanding across this chamber of the full extent of the situation we're in. Angus Council has, and I take on board what Councillor Wan has just said, that Angus Council has been languishing at the bottom of the table of council tax take for far too long. We've been on a trajectory that has been heading inexorably towards the concentration of all services, first of all in the 3 major boroughs, and then, no doubt, in due course, the concentration of all services in 1 borough, because that's what you get when you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back by having the lowest council tax take in mainland Scotland, or very nearly. So I think there's a realisation, certainly among the administration, and I believe across the chamber, that if we're to get off that trajectory, we have to increase our council tax at a greater percentage rate than other councils have to do. And if you, like me, believe that all the boroughs of Angus should have a decent level of service, then you've got to accept that we do need a substantial increases in council tax to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braze. And the very time that I didn't look for you, I didn't see you. I'm very sorry. I think we most certainly are finished now with comments. So I'd like to go to Councillor Duff to sum up. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost. And I don't think summing up requires an awful lot from me, to be honest. I think there's good things in all budgets, and all 3 present. We still have to wait for one, but I mean there are worthy things in all of them. I would say that. As well as the cessation of parking charges, I think we've got about £300,000 of additional items over and above the budget pressures, the £5 million budget pressures. And I think there's worthwhile things in there. Some things are small spends to provide a little bit tidier and smarter streets in Angus. So I think they're worth having. The infrastructure fund really is the key difference between our budget and the opposition one. It's 1.5% on council tax. It's £1 million. It gives us the borrowing power of 20 million, and it will help us to start to address some of the infrastructure issues we have. It's an ambitious plan for Angus, and I would ask you to support our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. And at this point, we would go to the vote. But I see that Councillor Scott has her hand up. Councillor Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Provost. Could I give notice of an amendment, please?
Of course. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Dorringer, second. The paperwork should be...
Go to the vote first.
We'll do the vote. We'll do the vote first, and then we'll see what you've written. Okay? I'll leave the vote in the capable hands of our committee staff.
Thank you, Provost. Oh, sorry. The motion by Councillor Duff, seconded by Councillor Beattie, is to approve the administration budget proposal as intimated and circulated to members of Council. The amendment by Councillor Gall, seconded by Councillor Wan, is to approve the opposition group budget proposal, again as intimated and circulated to all members of Council. Please vote motion or amendment, and Mrs Stewart will do the roll call.
Provost.
Motion.
Deputy Provost.
Motion.
Councillor Beattie.
Motion.
Councillor Bell. Motion. Councillor Boyd.
Motion.
Councillor Kenny Braze.
Motion.
Councillor Cowdy.
Motion.
Councillor Cruikshanks. Councillor Devine.
Motion.
Councillor Doran.
No vote.
Councillor Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Durno.
Motion.
Councillor Fotheringham.
Amendment.
Councillor Gall.
Amendment.
Councillor Gregg.
Amendment.
Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor Meakin.
Motion.
Councillor Melville.
Motion.
Councillor Gavin Nicholl.
Amendment.
Councillor Louise Nicholl.
Amendment.
Councillor Proctor.
Amendment.
Councillor Scott.
No vote.
Councillor Shepherd.
Motion.
Councillor Speed. Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Wan. And Councillor Whiteside.
Motion.
Sorry, there's 15 votes for the motion, 10 votes for the amendment and 3 no votes. Therefore, the motion is carried.
Provost, can the opposition group record our dissent to that decision, please? Thank you.
Can I just confirm that that's all the members of the opposition group? Thank you. And now I'd like to call on Councillor Scott. I do, Councillor Scott. Move your amendment. Sorry, I maybe wasn't very clear. Move your amendment.
Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, let me give my thanks to the finance officers, especially Gillian, for their help throughout this process. I'd like to thank both Councillor Duff and Councillor Wan, who we have both had conversations with around the budget. My last vote of thanks goes to the members of the public who took part in the budget consultation. You have heard the difficulties that Angus Council face from both the administration and the opposition, so I'll not go over that again. However, it is not a pretty picture, and I agree wholeheartedly that the change programme has run out of steam. Each year it gets more and more difficult to make the savings needed, and this year was no different. So we have done the best that we can with the limited resources. Today, alongside my councillor colleague, Councillor Doran, I'm proud to present a budget that has new ideas and puts people, communities and local businesses at the heart of everything we do. This budget represents a shift in how we approach our responsibilities, aiming to make Angus a better place to live, work and visit. We have focused on delivering practical, sustainable support for those who need it most. And with this budget, we are not just allocating funds, we are investing in the future of our local communities, our young people and our businesses. So I'll read out now some of the key features we are introducing. A new town centre first policy. Our high streets are the beating heart of our communities. This new approach will help breathe life into them once more, providing support for local businesses to thrive, whilst recognising that shopping habits have changed. It means that the health of town centres is put at the heart of proportionate and best value decision making, seeking to deliver best local outcomes regarding investment and de-investment decisions, alignment of policies, targeting of available resources to priority town centre sites and encouraging vibrancy, equality and diversity. This is not a new idea. Our neighbouring council, Aberdeenshire, were the first to implement this award-winning policy in the UK. And we think it's time that Angus put a focus on town centres. Homework clubs and Planet Youth. Education is key to unlocking potential. We are investing in Homework Clubs and Planet Youth programme, which has proven itself to be a huge success in the pilot programmes run so far in Angus. This will support further opportunities across Angus, giving young people the resource they need to succeed academically and personally. We understand that for many families, the cost of living is still a significant concern, and we know that utility costs are rising again in April. That's why we've made the decision to freeze school meal costs, ensuring that children continue to receive nutritious meals without additional financial strain on their families. We're allocating £100,000 to support community asset transfers, empowering local groups and organisations to take ownership of spaces and assets that matter most to them. The Vibrant Communities team plays an essential role in supporting the social fabric at Angus, and we are committed to maintaining this team, ensuring that their efforts in building strong, connected communities can continue. Funding for child visibility. Our children's safety is a top priority, and we are providing funding to improve child visibility across the region, ensuring safety for young people as they travel to and from school. Bus stops. We're also focusing on the little things that make a big difference. We will invest in cleaning bus stops, improving the environment for commuters and visitors alike. And we will be keeping parking free in our towns, helping to encourage people to shop locally and support our high street businesses. And again, this is something I'm delighted to see in the administration budget. Returning general waste to Brechin. Finally, we are pleased to announce the return of general waste services at Brechin Recycling Centre, and I am delighted that the administration also has this in their budget. I imagine some councillors will say this is a backward step and that we need to increase the recycling rate. Why should the burden of increasing the recycling rate fall on the shoulders of the smallest boroughs? Here, here. We need to consider the increase in carbon emissions. And at the moment, a trip to dispose of any general waste from the furthest away point in the Brechin and Edzell ward is a 58-mile round trip. And whilst I appreciate the opinions of Councillor Proctor, we have a far greater distance to travel, and the other two sites are closed. That wasn't us that closed them. So it takes greater resources to bring them back, and I'm only sorry that we do not have the resources available to do that. The residents of Brechin and Edzell have all raised the increase in fly tipping we have seen since the withdrawal of general waste. And I recall debating with the former Councillor Fairweather, who asked me if I wanted to throw out a black bag. No, I don't. And neither do many other residents. But they do want to be able to drop off broken furniture or an old carpet at the shortest distance. And we all need to be environmentally aware and recycle for the good of the planet. And that's why we are providing greater convenience for the residents in the area and supporting our commitment to waste reduction and recycling and reducing the increase to carbon from these journeys. And we all know that council budgets are under pressure, and we wanted to keep the council tax as low as we possibly could while still having funding to invest in services. We are proposing a raise of 9%. With evidence that shows that single working age residents are hit the hardest by council tax increases, we have done everything that we can to keep the increase to the lowest level we could. With regards to service charges, we have proposed to increase these by 8%. We thought this was the right approach, given that the greatest impact of council tax increases is on single working age residents. So 8% means that the increase, the impact is on those who use our services rather than an across-the-board higher increase for everyone. And we think that's the right thing to do. This is a different approach, a budget that is not just about numbers on a page, but about people, communities and businesses that make Angus a unique and vibrant place. Together with this budget, we are laying the foundations for a brighter, more prosperous future. And I hope you can support our budget.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I'd like to invite your seconders, Councillor Doran, to speak.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Scott. I was pleased to work with Councillor Scott to bring an alternative proposal on this budget, and thank you too to all the officers that worked with us and supported us on it. I'm just going to focus on a few key areas of the budget, and I was really pleased to have had conversations with the administration over the past few months as part of this budget setting process. In that first conversation, I raised my worry and concern about the planned cuts to the Vibrant Communities budget, and that was my main focus, to ensure that that would be taken out of any budget proposals going forward. To me, a sign-off in a cut that was so large, almost £500,000, and without a clear overview of what the impact would have been completely unacceptable. So I'm really pleased to see that across the board that has been taken out of the budget proposals this year. I'd raised this originally as a worry when I was first elected in 2022, and I just want to recognise how varied and valuable work that team does in Angus, including supporting the important community resilience work that goes on, which has been vital for communities across Angus as they've been dealing with the impact of climate change. They also support our community councils, community groups, community cafes, welfare rights and economic development too. The impact of staff on year of a change programme and budget cuts can't be underestimated. Last year, Councillor Scott and I proposed that we cancel the proposed cuts to the economic development team, which is within Vibrant Communities. This wasn't agreed in the budget. However, partway through last year, these cuts were cancelled, so I was pleased to see that had happened. I just want to recognise that this year has seen an increase in investments for councils after 10 years of cuts, and this has stemmed from a change at Westminster, with the UK government delivering the largest funding settlement for Scotland in the history of devolution. I'm really pleased that some of this has reached local authorities through the Scottish Government, and it included over £5 million increase in core grant funding for Angus Council. An increase this year, though, can't undo the past 10 years of cuts, which have damaged council services and hit staff. Sustained increases for funding for councils is needed, and indeed a clearer picture of longer-term funding strategies for councils in Scotland would really be welcome. Some of the members of the administration have made much of the increase in national insurance, but I want to remind everyone, as it's been brought up already, that last year they made a choice to freeze council tax, which would impact and result in higher taxes in council tax for future years. This is what we're seeing now. I opposed that decision last year, and if a modest increase was taken last year, there would be more money that we could use this year. Nevertheless, the increase in settlement this year has allowed us, for the first time since I was elected, to present some opportunities for funding new ideas and cancel some cuts. So our budget proposes that the people of Angus benefit directly from the resources available to us, still with a council tax increase, although a reduced one. I'm really pleased that our budget supports the Homework Club and Planet Youth programme. I'm glad that we can propose further funding to support these. And I just wanted to give an example of just how tight funding has been. So Over the past year and a bit, I've spoken to the Scottish Fire Service and police about increasing the visibility of children when walking around in Angus at night. A particularly pressing issue for those that travel by bus and home to rural areas. Road safety issues are raised with me and again and again. And although this visibility programme would have had an extremely modest cost, there was no spare funding available anywhere within council and schools budgets to support this. Stickers for visibility would cost pennies. However, in this budget, we can support a programme that would enable reusable reflectors and other equipment for schools and pupils to keep them safe while travelling home from school. I know as a parent, finding coats with visibility panels isn't always easy, and often children wear black coats to school as well. In my first year, I proposed an amendment to free school meal costs. It's a small change but meaningful to families, and so I'm really pleased to repeat this again. It would be better if meals for pupils were free, but this is a small step that we can take in the budget this year. And I'm really pleased to see this proposal as well for the town centre first, and it would enable us to ensure that all of our decisions are focused on supporting our town centres. I sit on Development Standards Committee, so I'm involved with lots of decisions around new development in Angus all the time. I welcome the note about the status of RAC as well within the administration budget speech, because this is something that is really, really important. I've discussed this with officers in the background as well, so I wanted to just recognise the acknowledgement of that, and that will continue, and there's further information about that coming in March. Budgets are still very tight for local authorities, and the future projections show the challenges that still need to be faced. This budget is all about showing a different approach that can be taken, minimising some of the proposed detrimental impacts on staff, and includes new ideas that prioritise people, children and communities. I recognise as well that infrastructure funding is needed, but I just don't believe that an 11% rise this year in the council tax is justified. The 3-year plan for the administration shows that there's going to be further funding gap potentially that they're kicking down the road. And indeed, if as Councillor Boyd has raised, if there is a freeze in council tax next year, without an even bigger increase in funding for councils, I'd like a really bigger one, that will lead the council into further and deeper cuts next year. So my ask is for you to support this alternative budget, which takes some first steps to real and lasting change, which has some new ideas in it, rather than paying more but not receiving more. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Doran. And at this, I would propose an adjournment. Now, I would suggest 20 minutes this time, just to cut it back, unless one of you or some of you decide I'm talking nonsense. I'll go for 20 minutes. Happy with that? Okay, all the best.
Can we pause the stream?
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you so well. You've done so well. We've been really rattling through a very, very important meeting. And it's not because we've not been paying attention, because it's really important. And I thought I would just say that, so thank you for that. We've just heard the amendment, and we've had our time to look at it. So I would invite some questions, if there are any now. Doesn't appear we've got any questions. Okay, can we go to comments then? Anybody like to comment on the budget you've seen? Would you like to speak, Councillor Speed?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would just like to commend Councillor Doran and Councillor Scott for the work that they've put in and for bringing this budget. There are definitely, a number of items within their proposals that I don't think any of us could dispute, and we would, fully applaud their efforts. Hopefully, if this doesn't go through today, hopefully there are still other ways perhaps to bring some of those items within your budget. I still maintain the position that I stated earlier, but well done.
Thank you, Councillor Speed. And I'm going to bring in Councillor Boyd and then Councillor Gregg and then Councillor Cowdy.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, I did like this budget. I thought it had lots going for it. The only thing that it didn't have going for it, and I will put it down to younger or newer councillors coming in, and it was you keeping in the car parking charges. Councillor Scott, and I hate to have to say this, Councillor Scott, you are well aware of how Brechin hated. They came along here and did time after time trying to get people to try and stop the car parking charges. The hardware store in your own town came in and said he'd lost 30% of his business, and also that the other people were paying off. We have to get rid of these car parking charges. It was yet another unfair situation in that thing. So I'm actually trying here to help you, Councillor Scott, because the people that you look after, Councillor Scott, just unfortunately, like another great guy, Councillor Nicholl, will have to try and explain to his constituents why he didn't want his recycling centre open. I don't think you'll find it very hard. The rest of it was brilliant. The rest of it was brilliant. I would have gone for it the whole lot if that bit hadn't been in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I actually ask Councillor Gregg that we can bring in Councillor Scott, because she wants to address what she's been said. I think that's only fair. Councillor Scott.
Councillor Boyd, thank you very much for trying to help me. We have suspended parking charges, not bringing them back. However, the machines are there. I would have possibly liked to have amended the signage, but I don't think the machines sitting there do any harm. I don't think there's any great urgency to remove them, but we did continue to suspend parking charges, so I don't know if you're confused by that. And I'm well aware of the impact of the hardware store and all the other local shops, not only the hardware store, but actually another Semichem, their take-ins were down by 30%. So I'm well aware of the impact to our town centre businesses. However, just to be clear, we were not reinstating car parking, but thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. If I could go to Councillor Gregg and then Councillor Cowdy. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Provost. Along the similar lines of the car parking charges, I'm glad to see that all three budgets have continued to suspend those charges. That's what the public want, and that's what we're delivering for them. So I'm pleased to see that not only that was in our budget that was voted down, but also in the administration's budget and also the non-lines budget. But I would also like to make it quite clear to the public that whilst they see these items as being free, nothing unfortunately is free, whether that be eye tests, whether that be prescriptions, or being able to park in our car parks. These all come at a cost, and these are being covered, whether it be through council tax, general taxation, or whatever it is. Nothing is free. I'm also disappointed with Councillor Speed's decision not to vote on any of the budgets. Whilst in some aspects I may understand her position, I would ask her that perhaps in future maybe bring your own budget forward or suggest some amendments rather than not taking part in any of the discussion at all. I think that would probably be maybe more what the people in Arbroath we'd maybe like to see you do, rather than just no vote to everything.
Thank you, Councillor Gregg. Could I bring in Councillor Cowdy?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I thought there were lots of really good ideas in the non-aligned Jill and Heather's budget. I really like the darkness and visibility initiative, and I fully agree with Councillor Dorian that the council tax freeze has been really damaging, and it means that we're now having, by necessity, to shoot it up in a way that isn't ideal. I fully understand that. The difference for me, there are two key things that I asked for, and I had conversations with Councillor Duff about. One was maintaining the funding for the Climate Change and Biodiversity Officer role. My views on the importance of climate change and environmental focus are well known. And the other thing is, I think the most important thing, and the only really big transformational offer in any of these three budgets, is the Angus Public Infrastructure Fund. Again, my views on not having to rely on central government funding are well known. It's why I'm no longer a member of a political party. And this, I think, is a move in that direction, a move to being more financially self-reliant, which I think councils do need to be. We need to be as financially self-reliant as possible. I'm not throwing stones at the Scottish Government or the UK Government in any particular way. It's just we need to be able to move forward in a way that we don't have to rely on the whims of any particular central government administration. It's ambitious and it's imaginative, and I appreciate the opportunity to have inputted into that. So that is why I will be backing the administration budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm just getting some instruction there. Thank you very much, Councillor Cowdy. If we are finished with that, I think we then go to the vote, I believe, but just a bit of instruction. But we need to ask you, Councillor Duff, if you'd like to say something before we go to that, as the mover of the motion.
Thank you very much, Provost. I'll be very brief. I've got a few points jotted down. The administration budget is taking actions. It's not deferring. It's been taking positive actions. And on two issues, the targeted approach and on parking charges, we're making a clear decision. We aren't kicking cans down the road. Secondly, I would point out that our budget is actually spending more money than any of the other budgets, and we are supporting communities, businesses, etc. I think in my speech I perhaps glossed over some of the clean-up measures in our budget, as well as the bus shelter issue. We're also going to clean road signs, and we're also spending more on parks. All of these are small measures, but they will help to make Angus a little bit brighter. Councillor Cowdy has mentioned the climate change officer, so I won't go further on that one. I think the infrastructure fund is a key game changer. It makes the council more resilient. Almost all of the measures in our budget are continuing measures. We only have two one-offs. One is a genuine one-off. It's removing the parking machines and the signage. The other one is the holiday food and fun, which once again we've funded on a one-off basis. But everything else is continuing. And the final point really is, I mean, Councillor Doran is saying, well, she fears for next year because she doesn't know what the government's going to do. I would suggest to her that an 11% council tax increase this year is a little bit of extra buffer for next year, because if you look at the change programme for next year, it's quite thin. And, you know, there are events, dear boy, events that might happen between now and next year. 11% gives us a little bit more cushion against what might happen over the next 12 months. So I would ask you to support the administration budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. And just really before we go to the vote, it might be just worth reminding everybody the motion is still with Councillor Duff and the amendment is with Councillor Scott. I'll pass on to the committee members. There is no provision for that, Councillor Scott.
Okay, Thank you, Provost. The motion by Councillor Duff, seconded by Councillor Beattie, is to approve the administration budget proposal as intimated by Councillor Duff and as circulated to all members of Council. The further amendment by Councillor Scott, seconded by Councillor Doran, is to approve the non-aligned budget proposal by Councillor Scott and Doran as intimated and circulated to all members of Council. Please vote motion or amendment.
Provost.
Motion.
Deputy Provost.
Motion.
Motion.
Councillor Bell.
Motion.
Councillor Boyd.
Motion.
Councillor Braze.
Motion.
Councillor Cowdy.
Motion.
Councillor Cruikshanks. Councillor Devine.
Motion.
Councillor Doran.
Amendment.
Councillor Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Durno.
Sorry, motion.
Councillor Fotheringham.
No vote.
Councillor Gall.
No vote.
Councillor Gregg.
No vote.
Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor McLaren.
No vote.
Councillor Meakin.
Motion.
Councillor Melville.
Motion.
Councillor Gavin Nicholl.
No vote.
Councillor Louise Nicholl. Councillor Proctor.
No vote.
Councillor Scott.
Amendment.
Councillor Shepherd.
Motion.
Councillor Speed.
Abstain.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Wan.
No vote.
And Councillor Whiteside.
Motion.
Thank you. There is 15 votes for the motion, 3 votes for the amendment and 10 non-votes. Therefore, the motion is carried.
You will be relieved to know, so will my throat, that that's us folks. I'd like to thank you again for being so good in this meeting and helping each other, and helping me in particular. That goes without saying. Thank you so much.
Can we stop the live stream, please?